So today I'm going to be walking through how I made this very wide leg jumpsuit, and you can wear it with this neckline to the front, or you can switch it for the lower neckline. I used a new pattern for this, which is a jumpsuit bundle, which I think there are like 130 different combinations you can make with that bundle. So I'll link my Etsy shop down below. Hopefully that should be up by the time this video goes up. And I've tried to keep everything as beginner friendly as possible, as always. And I think that's everything, so let's get on with the video. So I'm going to be using two fabrics for this project, but you could easily just use one. So I'm going to use this red stretch jersey as a base. So this is a 4-way stretch and it is 95% cotton, 5% elastin, and I got this from Minerva. If you wanted to just use one fabric, that is the kind of composition that you want to look for this project. And then you will just be able to use the same fabric for the normal side and the lining of the top, and then you don't need to line the trousers. And then I also have this beautiful power net that I found on Etsy from a shop called the Fabric Merchant UK, which I'm basically just going to put over the top of this fabric. And it is very thin, so it's not really going to add a whole lot in terms of structure. So I'm just going to lay it straight over the top. And this is just a 4-way stretch fabric. It hasn't got as much stretch as this, so hopefully it's still going to work fine. If you want to try and find something like this for yourself, I would recommend searching something like printed stretch power net. I believe I searched for something like that on Etsy when I found this one, and there is quite a lot of options on there. I'm also going to be using pins, some fabric scissors, some fabric pens to draw out my pattern pieces, some interfacing. This is what I'm going to use to finish off my hems. And then I won't be using this for my jumpsuit just because I'm using that quite thin mesh and you will be able to see this through. But if I was just using standard jersey, which is fine for this project, you might want to add some flat braided elastic around the necklines, which will add a little bit of extra structure. So I'll talk through that as I get to that point. But this is completely optional either way. I'm not going to be using it in this project, but you can if you want to. And I'm going to be using my jumpsuit bundle pattern for this project, or it is very similar to my Harry jumpsuit pattern as well. So you could use that pattern and then just buy this sleeve pattern, which is my flutter sleeve. I think they're only £1, so you could add that on to the Harry jumpsuit as well. So for this particular project, I'm going to be using this high neck side of the top from my jumpsuit bundle, and I'm also going to be using this more scoop neck side of the top, which I would normally use for my gathered top. And then I obviously have my sleeve piece, which is the flutter sleeve from the bundle. And I also have my massive piece of the trousers pattern as well. And also my pocket piece from my pattern. So I'm going to go in and draw out all of my pieces and cut them out. And then I'll come back and show you what I've got in each piece and which fabric I've got them in. I've just finished cutting out all of my pattern pieces. So this is my first one, which is my higher neck side of the top. Now, whatever way that you want to make this, you will need 2 pieces for this higher neck side. So whether you are doing them both in a standard jersey or whether you are adding the mesh, you will need 2 pieces. So I have my 2 pieces here, one in my mesh and one in my jersey. I actually pinned these together to cut out the mesh because it's very, very tricky to cut out this kind of material because it kind of slides all over the place and it's quite tricky to draw on. So if you are using a mesh, I would recommend cutting them out like that rather than with your pattern pieces. So like I said, you'll want 2 of these no matter what kind of fabric you're using. So if I was making this without the mesh, I would just have 2 of this one because one is going to be a lining and one is going to be your base fabric. And this is exactly the same situation for your scoop neck side. You will need 2 pieces no matter what kind of fabric you're using. And again, I just pinned these together to help me to cut the mesh out. So I've got my 2 pieces here, and again, if you're making it without mesh, you can just have 2 in, for example, this fabric. And then moving on to the trousers, I have 4 pieces here in my red jersey fabric, which is all you will need if you are just doing this as a standard pattern without a mesh layer. You literally will just need 4 pieces for the trousers. The only thing that you will have to bear in mind is that if you are using a fabric with a right and wrong side, which this one isn't, this has the same on both sides, but if your fabric does have a right and wrong side, you need to make sure that halfway through cutting these out, you flip your pattern so that you have 2 facing in one direction and 2 facing in the other direction. But if you're using just a base fabric like this is, that is just a block colour, you won't need to worry about that too much. The pockets you will again need just 4 in your standard jersey fabric, and again if you have a fabric with a right and wrong side, you need to make sure you cut 2 in the opposite orientation like that, so that they can sit on each side of the trousers. So that is going to be all you need if you just want to make the standard jumpsuit and you aren't adding mesh. But if you are adding mesh, you just need to repeat the same pieces for the trousers and the pockets. So you want another 4 pieces for your trousers in the mesh and another 4 pieces in the pockets in the mesh. So here are my 4 pieces in my mesh. Again, skip this if you don't want to add the mesh over the trousers. And then this is the 4 pockets in the mesh. Again, this is optional. And it's unlikely if you use a mesh fabric that it will have a right and wrong side. But if it does, you again want to make sure that you cut 2 in each orientation. And the same goes for the mesh part of the trousers as well. And then I also have my sleeve pieces. So I have 2 of them cut out. I've cut them out in my mesh fabric, but you can also cut them out in your standard jersey fabric. So I could cut mine out in my red fabric. And on the pattern, there is a mark that you want to mark onto your patterns. I can't do this on mesh because it just doesn't show up, but it will show you where to attach them to the sleeve. So if you're using jersey, you can mark that onto your pattern. I think I did forget to mention about the pieces for the trousers. There is a mark up here that is going to show you where to attach the pockets. So you can just leave a small mark on your pattern pieces as you're cutting them out. So I'm going to start by making my top. So I have my piece in my red jersey and then my piece in my mesh fabric. Like I said, if you can't find any mesh or power net that you like, you can just use 2 in this fabric or in another jersey fabric. So also something that I did discover is that this does actually have a right and wrong side, this power net. So one side is a bit of a deeper colour than the other. I don't even know if that's going to pick up on camera, but this side is my right side. So I'm going to lay right sides facing together my 2 pieces of my top, and then I'm going to pin them just around the neckline. So now I'm going to go in and sew around this neckline with my overlocker. You can also use a zigzag stitch if you don't have an overlocker. So that's how my top looks once the neckline has been sewn in place. Now if I was doing this with 2 layers of jersey instead of the mesh, I would take my flat braided elastic and just sew that right on top of the seam around the neckline. So just around here, just sew it exactly the same, just straight on top. But because I'm using mesh and it's a lot thinner, I'm going to skip this part. You can also skip it if you do use 2 layers of jersey. It's not 100% necessary. It will just give a little bit of extra structure. So I've also gone in and repeated this step of sewing the neckline in place with my higher neck piece. Now I'm going to take this scoop neck one and turn it to the right side out. So I've got this piece the right way out and this piece inside out, and now I'm going to put this one inside this one and just match up these straps. So this strap goes inside this strap, just making sure the right fabric is facing the right fabric. I've got mesh facing mesh here and the red fabric facing the red fabric. This will be a bit fiddly because the mesh does tend to slide about a lot. And then I'm going to pin that in place. And the same with the other strap. So that's how that will look once they are pinned together at the straps. I'm just going to go and sew straight across the top of those straps with my overlocker, and you can use a zigzag stitch as well. So now that I've sewn the top of those straps in place, I'm just going to lay this out flat so that I can add my sleeves. I'm just going to push this over to this side just for a second. So I'm going to take my sleeves, and like I said before, there is a point on the pattern that will show you where it needs to attach to these straps, but because I'm using this mesh, I can't really draw it on because you can't see it. So instead, I'm just going to fold this down the center and put a pin on the fold, because that's going to tell me round about where the central mark is. And I'm going to bring my top back over and figure out which side of this is the right side. So this is the right side, so I'm going to place this sleeve right sides facing together with the top, so the right side is facing down, and use that pin that I've placed to pin it to the top. And then I'm going to continue to do that for the rest of this curved edge at the top. So here I can see where the end of that curve is, and I'm going to attach that to the end of this armhole. This is going to be very, very fiddly, I think, with this mesh. And then doing the same on this side. Just in general, if you're using jersey instead of mesh, but if you use jersey for the sleeve, this will be a lot easier. So now that I have my kind of points of interest pinned in place, I'm going to go ahead and pin the rest of the sleeve around that armhole. So that's my sleeve all pinned in place. I'm now going to go in and repeat all of that for the second sleeve. I'm also going to move my pins down a bit so that when I'm sewing it in place, I don't have to remove the pins, because I think that will turn out to be a bit of a nightmare. So I'm going to attach my second sleeve, I'm going to pin that in place, and then I'm just going to sew around this edge with my overlocker. Again, you can use a zigzag stitch. So that's both of my sleeves sewn in place. So I can just fold them out, and then I'm going to fold this along the top of the straps so that everything is right sides facing together. And now I'm going to pin along the sides of the top, so down here, and then I'm also going to pin down the side of the sleeve. So then I'm going to sew up here and down here for both sides. So that's how that looks once it's all pinned in place. Now I'm going to go and sew these edges with my overlocker. You can use a zigzag stitch as well. You just want to make sure that when you're sewing down the sides of this top, you need to be sewing through 4 layers of fabric. And if you're using mesh like me, it's probably going to move around a lot. So just be very careful as you're doing that section. That's all of my seams sewn in place. So now I have just got a couple of things left to do on the top. I'm just going to turn it to the right side out for now. So this is how it's looking. And now I'm going to finish off the bottom edge of this sleeve. I could actually probably just leave it as it is, but I am going to do some kind of hem. If you're using jersey, you can see how I finish off the hems of my trousers if you want to see a good way to hem your jersey sleeves. But for me, what I'm going to start with is I'm just going to go straight around the bottom edge of this edge with my overlocker, just straight around here. If you don't have an overlocker, you can just follow around with a straight stitch instead. Let me measure. You can try and aim for about 1/4 of an inch above the edge, just with a straight stitch all the way around, and then you're going to use that stitch to help you to fold it up twice. But I'm going to be able to use where I've overlocked as my guide, so I'm going to fold it and then fold it again. I'll just start by overlocking this edge and then I'll be back to show you. So that's how that looks once I've overlocked around the edge of my sleeves. And now I'm just going to go in with my normal machine. I'm going to fold this up once and then fold it again, and then I'm going to go over the top of this with a straight stitch. It is very, very fiddly, so you will want to take your time with this. So I'm going to show you how I'm going to sew that in place. So I'm just going to set my machine to a straight stitch. So I'm just going to take my sleeve and then fold it once and then fold it again, and then I'm going to place that under my needle. The first bit is the hardest, and then it will start to become a little bit easier. And I'm going to follow that round with my straight stitch, and I'm just going to fold it as I go. And just fold in each bit as you get to it. Once you get going, you will find it's a little less fiddly. It does start to kind of fold in on itself for you. And just as I get back round to where I started, I'm going to sew straight over that to secure the stitch. So that's how your hem will look. I'm just going to go in and repeat that for the other sleeve. So now that I've finished off the hems for both the sleeves, I'm just going to add a top stitch around the neckline and around this back area here. This is completely optional, especially if you're using jersey, but the top stitch is going to help this mesh to sit a bit flatter. So I'm literally just going to take my zigzag stitch on my machine and follow around here and straight around the back. So just around in a loop like that. So I've just set my machine to the medium size of my zigzag stitches, and I'm going to start around about the shoulder seam here. Just place that under my needle. And then I'm just going to follow around close to this seam. And then I'm just coming up to where I started at the shoulder strap. I'm just going to sew straight over the top of that to secure the stitch. And that's the top stitch all in place around the neckline. So this is how the top looks with the hems on the sleeves and with the top stitching done. I'm actually considering gathering this front section a little bit. I think it might be a little bit more flattering. So to do that, I'm just going to do that by hand, I think. So I've just got some red thread on my needle. I'm just going to sew a running stitch up the central area here. I don't want to gather too much. I'm actually just going to fold it in half so I know where the centre is. And then I'm going to put my needle in like this. I think it should be probably low enough, if not a little bit too low actually. I'm just going to go with it. So I'm just going to sew a basic running stitch up here. Just zoomed in a little bit. I've done the least straight running stitch I could possibly manage there. And then I'm just going to pull it like that so that I've got my gather. And then I'm just going to stitch through it a few times to secure it in place. So I'm just going to come through my gather with the needle, and I'm going to make sure I come through on the wrong side of the top. And then I'm going to do that a few times. So just going back through. And then again, coming through those gathers. So I'm just going to keep doing that until I'm happy with how secure it is, and then I'm going to tie it off on this side so that you can't see it. Now that I've got my top finished, I'm going to move on to doing my trousers. Now I'm going to move on to my trousers pieces. So I'm going to take 2 of my 4 pieces. If you're working with fabric with a right and wrong side, you want to take 1 in each orientation. So I'm going to start by placing them right sides facing together and pinning along this curved edge. And then once that's pinned in place, I'm going to go and sew that curve with my overlocker. Again, you can use a zigzag stitch. So I've just finished sewing this edge in place, and then I'm going to open my trousers out and finding that mark that I've left to show me where to add the pockets, I'm just going to pin them in place. So just pin in the straight edge of the pocket to the straight edge of the trousers. And now that they're pinned in place, I should have said as well, that should be right sides facing together. I'm just going to sew down this edge on both sides. So I've just finished getting my pockets sewn in place, and then I've gone in and repeated all of the same steps for my remaining pieces of the red fabric in the trousers. And I'm going to place those right sides facing together. And I'm going to pin them together. So I'm going to pin down and around the pocket, and then down the rest of the trousers, up and round this kind of crotch area, and then back up the other side. I'm going to get all that done, and then I'm going to show you with it all laid out on the floor so that you can get a better idea of where I have sewn. So I've just finished sewing all of my seams in place, and I've just laid them out so you can see a little bit better. So I've done just above the pocket, around this pocket, down this side of the trousers, straight up and round the central area, and then up and round the other side as well. So hopefully that's a little bit easier to see. So now that I have my trousers almost finished, I'm going to hem this bottom edge of the trousers. Normally with making a jumpsuit, I would wait until the end. I would wait until I've attached the top to the trousers, but because I'm going to have that mesh layer over the top of this layer, it's going to be a lot easier if I do this now instead of waiting until the end. So my favourite way to hem jersey fabrics like this is using some interfacing, and I just like to place that at that bottom edge and fold it up over the interfacing like that, and then I'll just press that in place. And I'm going to do that around both of the bottom of each leg, and then I'm going to sew that in place with a zigzag stitch. I'll show you how it looks after I've done pressing it, because that is going to take a little while. So this is how that looks once it's pressed in place, and now I'm just going to sew around this edge with a zigzag stitch to secure it in place. So this is how those seams look once they're sewn in place, and then I can put this piece to one side, and I've gone in and repeated all of those steps to make my mesh layer of the trousers. So you don't need to make this if you don't want to add a mesh layer. You can just stop at the jersey layer, and I finished that off in the same way that I finished the bottom of the sleeves as well. So now I'm going to start to attach the top to the trousers. If you're only using a jersey layer, you can use that instead of this piece. So I'm just going to turn this to the right side out, and then I've got my top the right way out, and I'm going to place that inside the trousers. I'm just going to start to match up corresponding edges. So I've got this side of my top here. I'm going to pin that to the side of the trousers. And then I've got the side of the top on the other side. I'm going to pin that to the other side of the trousers. And then I'm just going to continue pinning this bottom edge of the top around the top edge of the trousers. And I'm going to be pinning through 3 layers of fabric here. I've got 2 that are mesh and 1 that is jersey. So then once that's all pinned in place, I'm going to go and sew around that circle with my overlocker. You can also use a zigzag stitch. So this is how that looks once the top and the trousers are sewn together. Now if you just use the jersey trousers to do this part, then your jumpsuit will be done and you can turn it to the right side out. But if you're doing the double layer with the mesh, you want to take your jersey trousers and turn them to the right side out. Ignore this, you actually want them to be inside out. And then I'm essentially just going to feed these trousers inside these trousers. So I've got 1 leg here of my mesh trousers, I think. Right, so I've got my mesh trousers here. I'm just going to place them inside this leg hole. And then the same with the other leg, just straight down that leg hole. And now you're essentially just going to be doing the same thing with this area, sewing it to this area. So I'm going to pin that in place the same as I did with sewing the top to the top of the trousers, and then I'm going to sew that in place in exactly the same way. So that's how that looks once it's all pinned in place. You could do the mesh layer and this jersey layer at the same time. I just didn't want to risk how much this mesh moves around. So I think this is the safer way to do it, but if you think that you can do both layers in one go, you can definitely just do that. So once that edge is sewn in place, just turn this to the right side out and it will be done. So the only couple of other things that you might want to do is it is quite heavy, so you could potentially think about reinforcing the shoulders, which I normally do with just a piece of ribbon. I just sew a piece of ribbon in there. I'm not going to do it today, but I might do it at some point. The other thing, you might want to stitch your 2 layers of pocket together. So I would just take a hand stitch and just do a small loop in there to hold them together. Otherwise, the jumpsuit is finished.